I saw a Christian news magazine a couple weeks ago that had an amusing headline. It was titled, First Baptist Church Celebrates New $23 million Building, while the other one read, Baptist Relief Helps Sudanese Refugees. Now, the article here described how 350,000 of these refugees were dying of malnutrition and might not make it through the year. I was excited. I scrolled through and saw that Baptists had sent $5,000 in relief effort. Compare that to the $23 million that one church spent on a building. I'm not dissing that church or Baptists who raised the money, but something has gone terribly wrong. We have lost sight of Christ. We have all been lied to. We have been told by society that the American dream is the correct standard of living. We have been told to seek first ourselves and then with whatever is left, give that to God. We have been told that there is no cost to following Christ. All you have to do is pray a prayer, come to church, and sometimes read your Bible, and pray if you have time. This is one of the greatest lies that has ever been told. We have taken the words of Christ and distorted them into something that is not Christ. Instead of conforming to Christ, we conform Him into our image, and we largely worship an American view of Christ today. But we're going to take an honest look today of what the true cost of following Christ is. We're going to start with Galatians 2:20. This is Paul speaking, and he said, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself up for me. Paul has given up everything. That's what he means when he says, I have been crucified with Christ. He has given up his very life for the sake of following Christ. He has put to death all of his desires, wants, and needs in order to follow Christ because he realized that the cost of following Christ is much lower than the benefit of following Christ. Jesus said something very similar to this in Mark chapter 1, verses 17 through 18. He said, Follow me and I will make you fishers of men. And immediately they dropped their nets and followed after him. I don't know if you picked this up, but this is an insane thing that just happened. These men are fishermen. This is their livelihood. This is how they feed their families. This is what they do every day of their lives. This is their trade. They have learned it for a very long time. Yet instantly when Christ calls them, they drop everything. They leave it. They leave safety, security, comfort, and food, all to follow Christ. They give up everything that they have known, their city, everything that they have grown up with, to follow Christ, to go to places that they've never been, which sounds exciting at first, but they went to places that are not very exciting. They gave it up all to follow Christ. Christ said again in Luke 9:23 through 24, If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. Now let's focus on a few things here. He said that we must deny ourselves and take up our cross. Telephone ringing. What does it mean to deny ourselves? It means to give up everything. We no longer count the things of this world of any value. We take up everything to follow after Christ. What does it mean to take up a cross? Well, a cross to these people is not a pretty ornament that you hang around your neck. He is not talking about decorating your house with a life-size cross either. This is an instrument of torture and death that Christ is referring to. He is telling them specifically that, hey, you're going to get tortured and maybe even death for my sake. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be pleasant. But there is a greater promise here. He says if you lose your life for my sake, you will find a life even greater. In other words, if you seek the American dream, you will lose your life. You will not find anything of any value and you will die with nothing. But he said, but if you give up your life to follow everything, to follow after me, you will save your life and find a greater life in the process. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said something kind of similar in his book, The Cost of Discipleship, which is an awesome book, and if you want to be challenged and realize how horrible we are, You can pick it up. He said, "The call of Christ bids a man come and die." Does that sound pleasant or appealing? I don't think so. He's telling me I gotta die. He's telling me that the only way to follow Christ is to give up everything, to put my life to death, to crucify myself on a cross so that I can follow Christ. Would you be willing to put to death all of your comforts and dreams for Christ? Would you be willing to give up everything? Your iPod, your PlayStation 3, Call of Duty, the new game coming out in November? Would you be willing to give up that to follow Christ? Would you be willing to give up makeup and new clothes for a year to follow Christ? Girls and maybe guys, I don't know. Don't put makeup on, it's not funny, but anyway. Jesus said again in Mark 10:21 through 22. Jesus is talking to a rich man who asked what he needed to do to follow after Christ. And Christ at once asked him if he has kept the commandments, and he said he's kept them since he was a boy. So basically he's saying that by the Jewish faith, he has done what is required of him. And Jesus says you lack one thing. Remember, he's talking to a rich man. You lack one thing. Go, sell all that you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. And come and follow me. Disheartened by this saying, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. Now, what is Jesus talking about here? Is he telling this guy that he has to really sell everything that he has and give to the poor? Is he telling him that he has to really give up everything, that he has to really go and sell his house, his belongings, so that he will have treasure in heaven? Yes, he is. There is no way around it. Jesus is not exaggerating, otherwise this man would have understood that exaggeration and been happy about it because he didn't have to sell everything. Jesus was really calling him to sell everything that he had. Everything. Think about that for a little bit. Give up everything you have to follow Christ. If you're like me, you're saying, I don't want to. I like my iPod. I want to play PlayStation 3 tonight. I want to go to the movies tomorrow and go to the mall and get a new pair of jeans. Girls. Not me, really, but whatever. Now, how do we react to these extreme calls from Christ? Traditionally, we have dumbed them down to say that Jesus is exaggerating, that we really don't have to sell everything, that we really don't have to hate our family and become homeless. Somehow, I can be materialistic and still follow Christ. That's what we've taken it to mean. But what Jesus is really saying, what he's getting at here, is that we should not follow the world. We should not put value in possessions and in constantly increasing our wallet so that we have more money than we ever needed, so that we can swim in a pool of money or pudding, whatever you desire. This is a radical change in perspective. I can't say exactly how it looks for all of you because it may be different. Your possessions, your desires may be different from mine. But what it is a radical abandonment from everything that we hold dear in this world. From everything that this world has to offer, we give it all up. Like Paul said, we count everything as loss for the sake of knowing Christ. This is telling us that we should learn to live lives content instead of following the countless drones in America seeking more money, more things, more space, more cars, whatever, fill in the blank. We must be ready to forsake all things to follow Christ. Life is not about making you happy or making you comfortable. It's about Christ, and he is the greatest treasure. There is nothing of any greater value in following Christ. And if you're sitting here thinking that this is easy, you're wrong. There is no one ever who's followed Christ that thought it was an easy thing to give up security. It wasn't a fun thing for the disciples to drop their nets, and they didn't follow Christ skipping with joy and pleasure. They followed Christ, and the majority of his disciples followed him to their death. Are you ready to give up everything? Jesus told a parable, and we're going to end with this, in Matthew 13:44 through 46. These are two very similar parables, hence the reason they're right next to each other. It's a parable of the hidden treasure in Matthew 13:44 through 46. He said, "The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. Then in his joy he goes and sells all that he had and buys that field." And again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls who, on finding one pearl of great value, went and sold all that he had and bought it. Now, why is Jesus telling us these stories? What is his purpose? Well, it's pretty simple. There's this dude walking around, finds a sick treasure in a field, and covers it up, buries it so no one can find it, and runs away, sells everything he has, and buys the field. He buys the field so that he can get the treasure. Same thing with the man with a pearl. He's walking around and finds the sickest pearl. He finds like a giant pearl the size of my head, which is pretty big. And he's all excited about it because it's a sweet pearl. It's all round. It's all pretty and white and crap. And he sells everything that he has and buys it. Now this is what all of these verses have meant. We give up everything to follow Christ. There's no way around that. Christ doesn't say, give up most of your crap and follow me. He doesn't say give up some of your possessions or give up your most valued possession. He says, sell everything and follow me. Now I said, I don't know how this looks for you. I don't know if you're really going to have to go and give up everything. But this is a radical change in perspective. This means that you count everything as a loss, that nothing is of greater value than Christ. This means if he tells you to give up your iPod, you give up your iPod. It's not an easy thing, but if Christ tells you to give it up, you got to be ready to give it up. This means that nothing can compare to knowing Christ. He is the greatest treasure. He is the pearl and the treasure in the field. Are you ready to give up everything to follow Christ? Are you ready to sacrifice all of your needs, desires, and wants so that you can follow Christ instead of following the world? Maybe you have been following the world and you need to give up some things. Maybe you need to ask Christ for forgiveness because instead of worshiping Christ for who he is, instead of giving up everything that he has given us, instead of following him, you have followed the world. You have sought after money and things and space. Maybe you need to give some things up for Christ. Maybe you need to set them aside and make Christ the God of your life instead of false images that are toys and are meaningless. iPods fail. They break every day. Are you ready to give everything up?